Alright, you'll remember when we put the T26 T1 away, I had discovered it was leaking water again. Same problem I had with the R18, where I did the sealant, but it didn't stay sealed, so we're going to have to take this apart again. I am going to start with removing all this throttle linkage, because if you remember the last time we took the engine off, that was in the way. So alright, I guess we're just going to leave that loose on the side of the engine, so that when we lift it out of the way, it'll come up. And the last time I tried to do this, I went for these big nuts, but it turns out the tiny brackets to the bottom of the tiny brackets are the ones that have to get removed. There's no way to slide the engine along, so we'll go straight for those. There is, oh, and then the underneath on the back, that's the secret. It was the front brackets here. And we got to go upside down to get the bolts from underneath that hold the back of the engine on. But because this has the same style of ignition as the R18, where the sensor is loose, then we get, wait, it's the 2.5, not a 3. So it's 1.5 millimeter on top and these 2.5 millimeters on the back, on the bottom, to get the bolt, to get the engine out. But the hall sensor is socketed on this, so the ignition can stay in place and the hall sensor will just slip out of the way when you take the engine. And then of course it's grounded through all of these bolts, so by loosening those, it just comes off, and there's enough oil in the head of that bolt, and that bolt head is exactly 2.5 millimeter, that it stuck to the end of my driver, which is interesting. So, alright. and then the linkage can come off the side. And we can set the frame of the tractor out and wipe up some of the vast amounts of oil and stuff that build up under the engine. But now we got the engine separate, we can get that apart and see about trying to reseal that. Okay, so the head here needs to come off, and I'm going to work from the top head end of the engine, because I think I can do this all without taking the bottom end off. In particular, that panel that I sealed on with the sealant and doesn't seem to leak any oil, so it's nice, it keeps all the oil in, but I don't want to have to redo that. So I'm going to try to do this without taking the intake or exhaust off either. Although I might have to just to get access to those nuts. Go. On head. Definitely got to take the gasket off. Take the two valve rods out. And you can see all the water in the oil here. Just need something broad and flat to help pull that up, so it doesn't kink it too much as you're removing the head gasket, although I may anneal this again before I put it back on to help it seal. Now, can I get that liner to come out, or do I need to open the back to access it? And push it from the back. That's the one thing I wasn't thinking about. I'll probably have to open the back just so I can push on that liner to get it out. But oh yeah, there's a lot of oil in here. And that reservoir looks sealed in there, so I don't know why it's leaking, but it is. Definitely getting a lot of water in my oil, so gonna have to try doing that again. Alright, well, I'd hoped I wouldn't have to do this, but we're just gonna pop this back panel off so I can get in there and push that liner out. And I'll have to take the rod and piston out, well, at least the big end off, to make space for that to happen. But I'll also fuel tank comes off. I've also considered figuring out a way to mount the fuel tank with a little bit more space, or to put some insulation in between here to keep the heat from getting transferred into the tank, because, you know, we observed that boiling problem, but that's some heavy-duty modification because of the way this nipple points and has to tuck under there, so it's a separate thing for a completely different day. There we go. Oh yeah. See, there's so much water getting in there. So, oh, and that, yeah, that sealant barely stuck to this at all, so, alright. I'm going to do the same thing we did with the R18. We're going to reattempt this after a thorough degreasing with brake clean. But we'll take the drain plug out too, just for completeness. Which I think it's cute there's a drain plug in this engine, which it clearly was designed before they had a tractor to put it in, because that drain plug is completely inaccessible, just like the fuel or the oil fill here. When it's mounted in the engine, that oil fill is completely inaccessible. So I am going to reach carefully in and put this driver on the edge of that liner and push, and there it goes. Alright, didn't have to remove the piston and cylinder, and did get a massive gap of sealant out of there, but it's clearly not doing its job, so again, we'll take this and get it thoroughly cleaned up and apply a lot of brake clean to it so that the sealant has the best chance possible to seal on it. And then we'll try this again. I think, oh yeah, look at all that water in there. Since we'll be blasting this with brake clean anyway, we'll get that piston and connecting rod out of there, because we'll need to oil it to reassemble it anyway. Didn't quite get the bottom off. There we go. There. Big end. That piston is very badly scored. What about this liner? How does this liner look inside? Well, that liner is scoring really badly too. Yeah, definitely getting too much water in that oil. So, yeah, not sure how visible that is, but definitely too much water in that oil. Gonna have to make sure we get that sealed up really good. It does appear that there is, see this indent here for an extra sealing barrier. So I think that, as I think when I did this before, I only applied sealant from the top here to the outside of the cylinder liner. But because there's this indent ring inside there, I am going to reach in and pack both of those rings in there with sealant. I don't know if the original design had an O-ring in that location instead of the pair of O-rings on this on the liner, but we'll put sealant in there, and hopefully that will create a much more thorough interlocked seal to keep the water from working down into the... Yeah, there's so much water in the bottom of that. Alright, well, off to find the brake clean and spray all these off and clean them thoroughly. And then I'm gonna probably find, take this ring off and get some sandpaper and try to polish these scores off the side of this piston, and a little bit, just, you know, re-round it and smooth those scores off so that they're not in here, and maybe hone the cylinder a little bit in the hopes of getting some of that scoring to stop. And yeah, this engine is definitely in need of a pretty good overhaul, and it's got that water leak issue that has to get resolved. I may, if I can't resolve this water leak with sealant, you know, I'd rather use water to cool it to keep it at lower operating temperature, but if I cannot get the water to seal, it's also, you know, easier to just dump the water out when you're done running. But if I can't get that sealant to work, I guess that this is going to become an oil-cooled engine, and I'll just fill it with motor oil for coolant, which is fine. It'll just run a little bit hotter. But obviously that will solve the problem, because whatever oil leaks from the cooling hopper down into the oil pan will just be oil. So, alright. We'll be back after I've applied brake clean to everything.